There's a very important character in one of my favourite ever TV shows, Doctor Who is named the Master. This certain character is known to regenerate and reincarnate in different physical forms. The idea was that the Master's memories would persist through each regeneration. Now let me ask you this, does that sound familiar to you at all? Well, if you said yes, then fair play, because the sages in Assassin's Creed were actually inspired by the Master in Doctor Who, as mentioned by the man himself, Darby McDevitt. One of the most underappreciated parts of Assassin's Creed lore are the Sages. This particular group of people do not often get the spotlight in Assassin's Creed games. We'd often only touch upon the idea of Sages very briefly and then forget about them 15 minutes later. If you're not aware as to what a sage is in Assassin's Creed, a sage is referred to as individuals who possess the inherited memories of Aita, aka Juno's husband, who was an Isu that died shortly before the Great Catastrophe. We've had quite a fair amount of sages in Assassin's Creed games that we've actually encountered. There's Bartholomew Roberts from Black Flag, John Standish, who is also from Black Flag, Jacques de Molay, who we encountered during the prologue of Assassin's Creed Unity, and also Francois Thomas Germain, who is of course the main antagonist in Assassin's Creed Unity. Now yes, there are also sages in other Assassin's Creed forms of media like the comics and whatnot, but the ones I mentioned are the ones the majority of people would likely know about. There is also other types of sages like Basim, who's a reincarnation of the Isu Loki, or Eivor, who's a reincarnation of Odin. In summary, there's a lot of sages in this franchise. In fact, there's quite a fair amount that you've never heard of. What's interesting is that a typical human's DNA includes a tiny fraction of first civilization DNA. In fact, it's between 0.0002% and 0.0005%. However, when it comes to sages, they actually have between 5 and 6%, which is a massive increase. Now what I want to do in this video is explain how sages work in the series, talk about some sages that not many people would know about, and also how sages would affect the future of Assassin's Creed. I'm going to try my best to explain everything in this video without confusing you. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, when talking about sages in Assassin's Creed, the common question that gets asked is how is a sage created, and why were they created? Now the focus of this question lies in the Isu, and this is the very first thing that needs to be discussed. The Isu, if you don't know, are a very powerful ancient race in Assassin's Creed lore, living thousands of years before humans. They had incredibly advanced technology, and even came up with creations such as the Apple of Eden, which we know are central to many of the game's stories, and they're even said to have created humans. Now knowing this little piece of background information helps us understand sages a little more, and why they can have ancient memories in their DNA. Sages are born as regular people, but have memories from an Isu named Aita. Now this raises a few questions such as how did sages come to light from Aita, and also why were sages even created? So during the last years of the war between the humans and the Isu, Aita himself decided to be part of Juno's risky project to save their kind by transporting his consciousness into a different body entirely. Unfortunately, this plan failed and the experiment did not work. What pretty much happened was that Aita's mind ended up fragile and stuck in his own body without any way to fix him. Now Juno, knowing this, decided to team up with the Isu Odin to find a special Isu creation called the Mead of Poetry, which was able to create sages like Aita to live once the Isu were extinct. The result of this pretty much ended up leading to Aita being constantly reborn over and over throughout history, which is why you've seen Aita sages in games like Black Flag and Unity. Some of these reborn sages will have similarities in appearance to Aita himself, which is interesting to know. Sages also commonly hold a negative opinion of humanity, similar to that of Aita himself during his lifetime many years ago, thinking that the Isu should rule over humans again, with humans resuming an almost slave-like position. This belief aligns many of Aita's sages with the Templar Order, which also advocates for total control and order over humanity. These sages are also often motivated by a wish to reunite with Juno, working towards bringing Aita back in human form to be with her again. Now that you know the history of how sages were created, let's now talk about the sages themselves in the games. So as I mentioned earlier, sages were born as ordinary people, but have memories of Aita. These memories often come to them in visions, which often starts in adulthood, but sometimes even in childhood. It's said that when they experience these visions, it can be very disorienting and unsettling, often causing them to feel like they're losing their minds as Aita's memory starts blending in with their own. Sages live a normal human life until their ancient memories surface, at which point they frequently encounter a challenging situation where they typically have to give up their human existence to fully accept their Isu heritage. Now there is somewhat of an exception. For example, take the prologue of Assassin's Creed Unity. Jacques de Molay was a person that managed to find some peace of mind. He also seemed to not have heterochromia, which is what distinguishes sages, as they'd often have two different coloured eyes. However, this is probably the Ubisoft development team overlooking this accidentally, which does not surprise me at all. There is also other sages in the series that try to fight these personality changes without much success by trying to hold on to their original selves by pushing away these new memories. Sages such as Bartholomew Roberts from Black Flag and also John Standish from the modern day of Black Flag show that finding peace of mind does not always work whilst being a sage. We see these two characters specifically become much darker, leading them to be very cynical people that have no care for human life at all. After all, we saw how John Standish in Black Flag used us, even with the many risks involved. There are also very rare instances where a sage manages to keep their sanity entirely. Take Elijah Miles for example, who is Desmond Miles' son. He's a character in the Assassin's Creed comics that manages to be rather sane. I guess his unique family background as well as being a sage helps him fully use his Isu powers without actually losing his mind like Bartholomew Roberts and John Standish did. If you thought the Aita Sages were pretty fascinating and kind of confusing, well, Assassin's Creed Valhalla decided to introduce a whole new realm of sages. You see, prior to the Great Catastrophe, there was a faction of Isu known as the Aesir that dominated much of Scandinavia and Europe. In fact, you'd probably recognize them even without Assassin's Creed. If you played God of War, then you definitely know. Human beings looked at these Aesir as Norse gods, and these Norse gods during the Great Catastrophe were looking to find a way to survive. So what they did was steal Juno's research to give out their consciousness within the human genetic pool, which is exactly what Aita did as I mentioned earlier in the video. The sages that we know of in Assassin's Creed Valhalla can be seen in this image. From the left we see Sif, who is known as Thor's wife. There's Thor himself, who we know is the son of Odin. There's Odin, who is god of both war and death. There's Tyr, who is known as the god of war, as well as being Odin's close friend. There's Heimdall, who is known as the watchman of the Aesir, and is also Odin's son. There's Freya, who is Odin's wife. There's Freyr, the brother of Freya, and last but not least, there's Eden, who is the goddess of youth. These are the sages introduced in Valhalla. Honestly, I do find it pretty cool, knowing that Ubisoft managed to implement Norse mythology into the game with their own blend of Assassin's Creed being the sages. So when we play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we play as Eivor, aka the reincarnation of Odin, aka a sage. During the story of Valhalla, we meet Basim, and at first we think he's just an assassin. However, the plot twist of Valhalla is that Basim is in fact, you guessed it, the reincarnation of Loki, who is also a sage. Now towards the ending of Valhalla, we actually managed to see Basim, or rather Loki, escape to the modern day, in which he managed to trick Layla into entering Yggdrasil. There's a sage in Assassin's Creed that not many people know about. Now, I'm not talking about a sage that's deep within the lore and requires you to look it up on the Assassin's Creed wiki. I'm referring to a sage that we actually meet in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, a sage that we even have a whole quest related to, and that is Master Spy. Now if you played through the World War I missions in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, then you know exactly what this is. Master Spy was a member of the Templar Order, as well as being a sage of Aita. He operated in London during World War I, and throughout those missions in Syndicate, he ran a spy network for the German government, whilst also establishing a localized cult in the name of Juno. Now, not much is known about the early life of the Master Spy or how he dealt with Aita's memories clashing with his own. By the time he was an adult, Aita's personality had completely taken over, driving him to search obsessively for a quote-unquote beloved, as he liked to say. And then by 1916, both Winston Churchill and Lydia Fry became aware of the Master Spy's activities and joined forces to stop him. So pretty much throughout the World War I missions in Syndicate, we had to take out many of the Master Spy's agents and steal any information that was considered important that they had gathered. Fast forward a little and we managed to find the sage himself in his secret base. For the first encounter with him, he manages to escape by using a stun grenade to confuse Lydia. However, for the final encounter with the Master Spy, we assassinated him and put an end to their operations in London. I believe this was the last known record of a sage within the Assassin's Creed games. Now what's interesting is that after we kill the Master Spy in this mission, we get intercepted by none other than Juno herself, aka the wife of Aita, and this is what she had to say.
The man Lydia Fry killed was my husband, Aita, reborn. Known in your time as a sage. Thank you for discovering his fate. His pattern will be added to my own.
Now these World War I missions in Syndicate were great examples of how Ubisoft can implement sages into their storyline. However, will they introduce any more sages into the franchise? Well, I'll answer that towards the end of the video, as I have some things to say in that regard. A common theory that I've always seen since the beginning of when sages were introduced has to do with Al-Mualim from Assassin's Creed 1. The theory raises the question of whether Al-Mualim was a sage. We know that a sage is somebody who has memories from the Isu which unfold throughout their life, offering deep knowledge about the ancient civilization. Now regarding Al-Mualim, there's a question of whether he was a sage. You see, sages often have unique physical traits, such as differing eye appearances. This is known as heterochromia. Al-Mualim actually had a scarred and blind eye, which some might say fits the description of sage characteristics, based on Altair's observations in the Assassin's Creed Secret Crusade, which includes details from Al-Mualim's youth. Throughout the entire narrative of Assassin's Creed 1, Al-Mualim follows his own path, seemingly not fully committed to either the Assassins or the Templars. While he acts as the mentor of the Assassins, he eventually betrays Altair and the Brotherhood. The act of betrayal is a common theme among characters identified as sages in the series. Al-Mualim's difficult nature and his obsession with the Apple of Eden could hint at the emergence of Aita's memories, considering Aita's influence is seen in various individuals across history who navigate between different factions, often betraying them. For example, Bartholomew Roberts, as we know, was neither a Templar nor an Assassin, but he did have ties to both factions, and then eventually betrayed them both. There's also John Standish, who is linked to the instruments of the First Will. He acted independently of both Assassins and Templars, but infiltrated Abstergo to serve their cause. Francois Thomas Germain from Assassin's Creed Unity is identified as a sage, and he also manipulated his affiliations for a higher purpose related to Juno. Now, given these patterns, it is conceivable that Al-Mualim could be a sage. Sages often infiltrate organizations to manipulate events towards their goals, which in this context could involve Juno's agenda. So, was Al-Mualim a sage? That's my question to you guys. Leave it in the comments below, as this is a pretty interesting theory. Another theory I've been seeing online is to do with Assassin's Creed Origins, but more specifically the character known as the Son of Ra. This theory suggests that the Son of Ra was in fact a sage. Now, first of all, who is the Son of Ra? The Son of Ra is a character in Origins that was an Egyptian farmer turned criminal who led a group of bandits during the events of Origins. Now, I was pretty surprised knowing that the Son of Ra in Assassin's Creed Origins had his own memory corridor sequence. It's possible he was originally part of the main storyline but ended up being cut content, leaving this segment as a fascinating remnant. Now, what makes this memory corridor particularly compelling is the Son of Ra's ambitions and beliefs. He sees himself as a deity, untroubled by the notion of taking lives, claiming that the sight of 1,000 dead bodies would not bother him. He even places himself above Bayek, the Phylakitai, the Order, and a lot more. The Son of Ra's awareness of Bayek's past and the loss of his family, and his attempts to draw parallels to his own losses to justify his actions, adds a deep unsettling layer to this encounter. The fact that a character that's not even a main character in the game like the Son of Ra knows so much about Bayek is quite strange. Now, you could be wondering what this has to do with sages, and let me explain, as this is where it gets pretty interesting. So, towards the end of the memory corridor, his prediction of the Earth's destruction caught my attention, hinting at what could be the second disaster referenced at the end of Assassin's Creed 3. This is of course knowledge that would require some crazy insight to have, so if anything, it does seem like it's foreshadowing what was to come for the events of Assassin's Creed 3. It gets even more interesting when you realize that the Son of Ra has the characteristics of a sage, such as heterochromia, meaning different colored eyes. Now, combine this with his mysterious knowledge about Bayek and how the gods described his eyes, it raises the question if he could be a sage, given his godlike self-perception. In a letter sent to his followers, the Son of Ra described the sun as a rock on fire, indicating he possessed knowledge that was not common for the time period that they were in. The Son of Ra in Origins is the only character in the entirety of the Assassin's Creed franchise to have a memory corridor confession after his death that does not directly tie to the main story or any of the DLC storylines, which in my opinion definitely hints at his much larger role. What is that role? Well, we'll never know, but a sage seems to make the most sense given the information. This theory might be a bit far-fetched, but the evidence suggests that it's worth considering. What do you think? Do you think the Son of Ra was a sage? Okay, now this last part of the video is going to be a bit different. What I want to do is go over every current known Aita Sage in Assassin's Creed, and there are a lot of them. Some are pretty common knowledge, and some are characters you've never even heard of. Now, a lot of these sages I'm about to talk about don't have much information regarding them. However, with a bit of research, this is what I've discovered. The first known Aita Sage was an unnamed Sumerian sage during the years 3000 BC, which was a period of time that corresponds to the early to middle Bronze Age. In 2014, clues regarding this specific sage were uncovered by Abstergo Entertainment and highlighted in the company's employee handbook. Oh, and by the way, I don't usually recommend a lot of Assassin's Creed stuff that's not the games, but I do recommend giving the Abstergo handbook a read. It contains some pretty deep lore information about the franchise. Now, in terms of this Sumerian sage, the positioning of this particular person, in terms of both geography and time, appears to be a nod towards the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a collection of stories from Mesopotamia narrating the adventures of the king of Uruk, aka Gilgamesh. It tells us of his incredible strength, his bond with Enkidu, and his journey to find immortality. The second known Aita sage is more of an interesting one, and this individual is called the Wanderer, who is a Jewish sage born in Judea. Now, the reason why this certain sage is interesting is because around 30 CE, there are stories that he met Jesus of Nazareth on the way to Jesus' crucifixion at Golgotha. In 2014, Abstergo Industries added him on a list of potential sages. In fact, you are able to see this list of sages in a database entry in Assassin's Creed Unity. The Wanderer is similar to the myth of the Wandering Jew. This myth describes a man who encountered and ridiculed Jesus on his way to be crucified and was cursed with immortality, doomed to wander the earth until the second coming. The third known Aita Sage is similar to the Sumerian Sage, in that he is unknown. We do know that this sage was a mysterious individual from the Hunnic Empire that existed in Europe during its peak in the 5th century. Oh, and get this, he's also the ancestor of Desmond Miles. The fourth sage is a sage that I find to be quite fascinating, and that was Brendan of Clonfert. Now, if you're a die-hard Assassin's Creed Valhalla fan, then you would have recognized this name. Brendan of Clonfert was an Irish Celtic monk, and also a sage that lived between the early medieval period around 484 to approximately 577 CE. It's said that between 530 and 537, he went on a pilgrimage across England and the Isle of Skye, encountering remnants of the Isu civilization and recording his findings on stones near important sites like Seahenge and Stonehenge. In fact, you are able to interact with one of the stones, where it shows a drawing of the Isle of Skye at the top and also unknown scripture at the bottom of the note. This specific sage's journey lasted over 2 years, and it ended in Vinland at a standing stone where he mentioned being denied access by quote-unquote God's angel. Now, if you play the crossover stories in Valhalla, then you are able to solve his puzzles that he left behind. The thing I like about all these sages I'm talking about are that they're actually based on real life historical people, and are often not just random made up characters. That's why I feel like Assassin's Creed is one of the best history tools, and it's not just a video game. Yeah, Ubisoft had their own unrealistic twist on these stories, but it's still interesting nonetheless. The fifth known Aita Sage was an individual that lived during the 6th century, under the rule of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, and he resided in Constantinople. The sixth known Aita Sage was a sage that we learn about during the story of Black Flag, and no, it's not Bartholomew Roberts. So, do you remember seeing this statue in Black Flag? Well, surprisingly, a lot of people somehow confuse this and assume it's Bartholomew Roberts. I guess it could be the mustache. However, it's actually a Mayan sage. You see, during the pre-Columbian period, before the Spanish Empire invaded the Americas, there was at least one sage from the Maya civilization present on the continent, and that is exactly who this statue was. The existence of this statue serves as evidence of his presence, and was still visible in a temple within the ruins of Tulum. Now, in terms of who this sage actually is and any background information regarding him, there is not much. The seventh known Aita Sage was something that I already talked about earlier in the video, and that is Jacques de Molay, the 23rd and last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and also a sage. He was actually born a sage in 1244, and was one of the only sages in Assassin's Creed that did not appear to be affected with heterochromia. In the late 18th century, the Codex of Jacques de Molay was discovered by Francois Thomas Germain, who you of course know is the main villain for Assassin's Creed Unity. He utilized de Molay's writings to control the world financially, aiding in the initiation of the Reign of Terror throughout the French Revolution. The 8th known Aita Sage was born in 14th century China and was part of the Hongwu Emperor's imperial court. Abstergo Entertainment's historians found references to this person in 3 separate texts, where he was described as a scholar. The 9th known Aita Sage was an individual who passed away in 1516 that founded the Guardians of the Observatory. This group was made up of local indigenous people and was assigned to protect an ancient Isu surveillance facility nearby. In the early 1500s, this mysterious sage came to Long Bay, Jamaica to successfully find the observatory. He earned the trust and respect of the local Taino tribe during his stay, and to ensure that the site remained safe from outsiders, he had the Taino commit to guarding it and passing this duty down through their generations. This sage lived out his final days near the observatory and was buried by Long Bay by the Taino, who left his grave unmarked to keep his blood from being used to access the observatory. That then brings me to the 10th known Aita Sage, and this was Thomas Cavanagh Jr. himself. He was born in 1652 and died in 1706. Now, Thomas Cavanagh Jr. from a young age realized that he was not like other people, which caused him to struggle throughout his life. His situation became even more complicated when he got involved in the conflict between the Assassins and Templars. Cavanagh felt deeply troubled by being a sage, feeling very different from everyone else. Now, despite his challenges, he was kind and empathetic, writing letters about his life and experiences. He was not a sage like John or Bartholomew Roberts, who was evil. Instead, he was kind and empathetic, writing letters about his life and experiences. He hoped these letters would help others who were going through similar experiences, showing them that they weren't alone, and possibly helping them manage their own lives better. In fact, these letters are available in Black Flag. You can find 20 of them, I believe, throughout the world, and each letter details parts of his life. The 11th known Aita Sage is yet another character relating to Black Flag, but this one is the one we all know about, and that is Bartholomew Roberts himself. I'm sure you know the entire story of this character. I don't want to go too in detail because after all it spans pretty much the entire game, and I do not plan to be here all day. The 12th known Aita Sage was also somebody that's well known, and that was Francois Thomas Germain, the main villain of Assassin's Creed Unity. Just like Bartholomew Roberts, I don't want to explain his entire story, as it spans the entirety of Assassin's Creed Unity. The 13th known Aita Sage was an individual residing in India in the late 19th century, who was around during the establishment of the Indian National Congress in 1885. The 14th known Aita Sage was Master Spy, a character that I talked about in detail earlier in this video. The 15th known Aita Sage was a man named David Jones, who lived in England during the mid-20th century. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, there were sporadic accounts of a man with sage-like qualities, descriptions of him as otherworldly, extraterrestrial, and having multiple personalities circulated. Although these accounts remain unconfirmed, there is a hidden database entry in Assassin's Creed Unity that shows a brief conversation between Melanie and Alvaro relating to David Jones that notes that he had a career as a singer. Now we're coming up to the last two sages, and for the 16th known Aita Sage, we have the man himself, John Standish, who we of course know from the modern day segments of Black Flag. He's a sage similar to Bartholomew Roberts that downplays human lives and has no remorse. Now the 17th and last known Aita Sage is actually Elijah Miles. If you don't know who Elijah Miles is, well, he's the illegitimate son of Desmond Miles. Now the reason he's the last and final sage is because he's actually the person that killed Juno entirely. His character is truly special as he holds an immense amount of both sage DNA as well as Isu DNA from the Miles family. Elijah's story in the comics is pretty cool and I do recommend reading it, even though I did quite literally spoil the entirety of it. Now there is another type of sage besides the Aita Sages that's called the Vejovis Sages. These sages are another lineage connected to the Etruscan deity known as Vejovis. There's currently 6 known Vejovis sages, and the information about each one is quite extensive, so I won't go into detail in this video. If you do want to see a video discussing this other lineage of sages, then maybe I'll make a video on that too. Assassin's Creed features quite a fair amount of sages, who have continued to exist by merging their consciousness with human genetics. To add to the ongoing list of them, Assassin's Creed Valhalla introduced a new category of sages known as the Aesir, who were seen by humans as the Norse gods. Initially, Assassin's Creed games were known for introducing new characters and stories with each release, making them relatively accessible to new players. However, as the series began focusing more on the Isu, Sages and modern day segments, it started to lose some fans due to the confusing mess of these concepts. The addition of the Aesir in Valhalla further complicated the storyline, and it even alienated loyal fans. Now, in my opinion, while I don't really see an issue expanding the lore of Assassin's Creed, it's the approach that has been convoluted. Given the confusion already surrounding sages, I doubt Ubisoft would ever try to implement new sages into the series, especially considering that Juno's storyline had ended in the comic books. But that's just a wild guess. As of me making this video, Codename Red and Codename Hex are 2 games that have not yet been released. Imagining those 2 games, we get the introduction of new sages during ancient Japan as well as the witch trials. Now that would be cool. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button as it will help me out quite a lot. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.